Welcome to the Alzheimer's and Dementia Summit. I'm your host, Jonathan Landsman, creator of naturalhealth365.com. Did you know that every 3 seconds, someone gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia? In fact, Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death, kills more people than breast and prostate cancer combined, and Western medicine fails to offer a solution. As a health and fitness consultant for nearly 30 years, I believe Alzheimer's and dementia are the most misunderstood, cruelest, and costliest of all diseases. That's why I created this summit, to help you prevent, slow down, and reverse cognitive decline before it's too late. Our show today, Advanced Nutritional Strategies to Improve Brain Function. Our guest, Dr. Dr Jockers, is a functional nutritionist and chiropractor. He runs drjockers.com, one of the hottest natural health websites. He is the author of Supercharge Your Brain, the complete guide to radically improve your mood, memory, and mindset, and the Supercharged Recipe Book with over 180 full-color recipes to help you take back control of your health. Dr. Jockers is also a sought-after speaker around the United States on such topics as weight loss, brain health, healing leaky gut, thyroid function, natural detoxification, and disease prevention. In addition, he currently owns and operates Exodus Health Center in Georgia. We can all appreciate the influence food has on our health, especially its impact on brain function. But we still have a lot of work to do because too many families still buy food that, quite frankly, shouldn't even be called food. In fact, many of the speakers in the Alzheimer's and Dementia Summit clearly detail why many of these foods should be avoided at all costs. Personally, I still find it hard to believe that many of these processed foods are legal to sell. But that's for another day. Today, we'll focus much of our attention on the best foods for brain health. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dr Jockers to our program. Dr. Jockers, welcome.
Hey, Jonathan, so great to be on with you, and just so great that you're doing a summit like this and getting the awareness out about neurodegenerative disease, and I know this is going to help so many people.
Oh, I'm sure of that, Dr. Jockers. Why don't we start off by just talking a little bit to us about what inspired you to get into the field of brain health?
Yeah, growing up, I was an athlete, and school really wasn't the biggest priority for me, and I struggled. I just didn't really have a great attention span. I probably would have been diagnosed with ADHD during that period of time, and just over time, I started realizing, gosh, I'm not picking things up the way that I probably should be. And just like an athlete, when I stopped playing sports, I realized, hey, in a sense, my new area where I want to perform well is in academics when I was going into college, and just overall in life. And so I started doing things. I started reading books and learning different strategies that I could apply to have more energy, to have better mental clarity. I describe myself as a performance junkie. And at this point now, I've researched and studied the most advanced strategies for improving health for years. And what I found is that most people in society, and this is what I was doing, most people are destroying their brain every single day. Like, for example, we're doing an Alzheimer's summit here. Alzheimer's disease starts 30 to 50 years before, the individual is actually diagnosed. And so I was doing things on a regular basis that was causing chronic inflammation in my brain, leading to things like brain fog. I would constantly have brain fog. I wouldn't be able to remember words very well and be able to pronunciate things. I couldn't remember people's names. And so my memory was struggling. My attention span was struggling. And here I was, at that point, especially in my late teens, early 20s, I was a personal trainer. I was trying to teach people how to be healthy, and I was still struggling with my mental clarity. And by continuing to evolve and continuing to learn and study and apply different principles like what we're going to talk about today and what people are learning about in the summit, I was able to dramatically improve my brain function. In fact, at one point, I was actually on a scholarship in my undergrad, and I almost lost it because I was doing very, very poorly in a couple of my classes. And so I went from really just struggling to get by my first 2 years of college And then all of a sudden, I actually graduated near the top of my class. And then when I went to chiropractic college to get my doctorate, I ended up second in my class. And, it was just really learning strategies to take good care of my brain, to enhance my memory, and really optimize my overall function and performance.
Dr. Jockers, I say this with a lot of respect for a lot of people out there, but I think in athletics, I had a huge background in athletics as well and training high performance athletes, in my later years and earning money doing that. But, I think the most important thing as a takeaway for anybody is that we should take more of an attitude that this is really serious. If somebody's listening to this 25, 30, 40 years old, hey, I don't have dementia, I don't have Alzheimer's, but it's the idea of really taking an attitude that everything you eat and drink, the way we think and the way we feel, has everything to do with the way our brain is, and it can be so deceptive is my main final point that I know from personal experience, and I'm sure you're about to tell everybody about how diet is affecting our brain, that it's not only affecting our brain on a chemical level or biochemical level or physical level, however somebody wants to think of it, but it's also our thoughts and our feelings, our perceptions. And so that's why it could be really deceiving when we feel like we're lazy or we don't want to pay attention to something. Man, this is a bad diet. So let's focus on how diet really does affect brain health. Talk to us about it, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And so diet plays a gigantic role. In fact, they call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. And so most people out there understand that, hey, diabetes is very much lifestyle related. It's just elevated blood sugar, and body can't metabolize the sugar, and they have a special diet. Even if you go into mainstream medical model, which really doesn't emphasize nutrition at all, even if you go into that and you have diabetes, they're going to put you on some sort of a nutrition plan, even though it's probably not the best one. But with Alzheimer's disease, what we found, they used to just think that in a sense it was, okay, this neuronal loss and perhaps it's genetic, but we found that it's actually really very much tied into chronic inflammation and blood sugar imbalance. And so type 3 diabetes is what they're saying. And what happens when we have elevated blood sugar? So we eat a high carbohydrate diet. We're consuming a lot of breads and grains and just a lot of, in our society, of course, they've got high fructose corn syrup and everything. So we're drinking sugary beverages. Average individual is just consuming massive amounts of sugar. When that sugar gets into our bloodstream, obviously that blood sugar elevates. And so we have this hormone called insulin. And insulin's job is to take the sugar out of the bloodstream where it's toxic. In fact, uncontrolled diabetics, they can't get the blood sugar low. They end up with severe neuropathies, meaning if the blood sugar actually turns the sugar molecules, they actually damage proteins and enzymes, and they create something called an advanced glycolytic enzyme. It's like a sticky protein. And if you break that down, advanced starts with the A, glycolytic starts with a G, and enzyme starts with the E. So it's an AGE. So obviously, what does that do to our brain? It ages it. And so it ages our whole body. And so these AGEs, they go in, they just start damaging neurons, right? And so they damage our brain. And of course, diabetics who are uncontrolled, they lose their vision because, of course, the eyes are an extension of the brain. It's the optic nerve. It's an extension of the brain. They lose the ability to sense their feet. So peripheral neuropathy, and oftentimes they'll get cuts on their feet because they have no feeling left in their feet. And so it's doing the same thing to our brain. There's really not that much difference between the structure of a nerve and the structure of the brain. So it's damaging our brain as well. And so basically, when blood sugar is out of balance, when we have high blood sugar, because we're not able to control it well, we develop these AGEs. Now, there's a couple different types of issues that we deal with blood sugar. And so one is where the blood sugar goes up and insulin comes out, and we're just firing up tons and tons of insulin, but we're not getting a whole lot of response over time with getting the blood sugar down. And so this is somebody that has chronically high blood sugar, more like a type 2 diabetic. And in that case, it really affects the brain in a couple ways. Not only the AGEs that we talked about that are highly reactive and damage the neuronal tissue, but also it affects the blood vessels. And so it creates scarring and something called atherosclerosis in the arteries and arteriosclerosis as well, this shortening and constriction of the arteries. oftentimes blood pressure goes up and we don't get enough blood and oxygen into the brain. And then that causes the blood-brain barrier to then become more permeable, meaning the blood-brain barrier is supposed to protect. It's basically it's a cell wall in the blood vessels in the brain, supposed to protect the brain from any sort of, like, for example, bacteria that are circulating in the bloodstream, or toxins like mercury or aluminum, which I'm sure a lot of the guests on the summit have talked about. Aluminum found in the neuronal fibrils of the brain with Alzheimer's disease. So the blood-brain barrier is supposed to protect the brain from these kind of toxins and oxidative stress and different issues like that. So now the blood-brain barrier becomes more permeable, so it's easier for bacteria, inflammatory compounds the body produces to seep in there, as well as things like aluminum and mercury to cause damage in the brain. So that's one issue. Another issue is people that have hypoglycemia, right? So like I have a greater tendency to have hypoglycemia. If I eat a lot of carbs, at first I don't really notice a difference, but then 2 hours later or something like that, like if I have a sugary drink, it's like I can't think straight. I have brain fog. I'm hungry. I'm tired. And that's a classic sign of hypoglycemia. Now, what we found was that there's actually numerous studies that have shown that people that experience an episode of extremely low blood sugar, right, so hypoglycemia, to where they required medical attention, okay, just one episode during the course of their life, those individuals were tracked over time, and they were shown to have a twofold increase in the risk of Alzheimer's disease. I mean, that's significant, isn't it, Jonathan? I mean, you think about it, there's a lot of people out there that have that issue, and they have no idea that it's affecting their brain, and so it's huge. So anyways, when we have low blood sugar, it's like the brain is starving. So just like when it's low in oxygen because of the high blood sugar, now what it does, it becomes the blood-brain barrier becomes more permeable. Again, toxins are able to seep in, cause more inflammation in the brain, and cause more destruction. And then also blood sugar imbalances, whether you're somebody that tends to have hyperglycemia, so high blood sugar, or low blood sugar, it's going to rob you of magnesium. And that's super critical because magnesium helps protect, and in a sense, it's like the security guard for the blood-brain barrier. It helps to really keep good, strong tone in the endothelial membrane. It also protects our arteries from scarring, and we talked about that with high blood sugar. So when we become magnesium deficient, now, again, our blood-brain barrier becomes more permeable to heavy metals like aluminum, which is classically found in the hippocampus, and that's kind of part of the pathophysiological process of Alzheimer's disease.
Dr. Jockers, as I'm listening to this, it's no wonder there's so many brain problems out there. Children today bombarded more than ever with vaccines that are loaded with aluminum. Dr. Jockers just mentioned some of the speakers. Make sure you're listening to Dr. Exley, Dr. Chris Exley, who's the world expert on aluminum out of the UK. We've got him as part of the summit. Dr. Chris Shade is absolutely the best in the world in terms of mercury toxicity issues, testing, and what mercury can do in the body. And make sure for poor oral health issues, which are certainly a big source of the mercury toxins that are in the body and affect the brain, make sure you check out Dr. Stuart Nunley. Is one of the best dentists you will ever hear on that topic for sure. Dr. Jockers, really alarming information you're talking about here. It is no wonder that there's so many brain problems, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. And just, going into that, so like you were talking about there with mercury coming from the mouth, if you have amalgam fillings, the best thing you could possibly do for yourself in the short term before obviously getting them removed naturally would be do everything you can to keep your blood sugar stable and make sure you've got a lot of magnesium in your system to protect that blood-brain barrier. You want to protect that at all costs because you've got, a level of mercury that's seeping into your system. The last thing you want to do is get that into your brain.
This whole program with you, Dr. Jockers, is to really heighten that awareness and really deepen, make richer that appreciation of what food can do for us or work against us. I mean, it's amazing. The attitude of like telling somebody, hey, why don't you jump into a swimming pool with all kinds of waste products in there and toxins, right? Everybody would say that's nuts. I would never do that. But yet inside our body, you're describing this environment, this fluid, if you will, that's bathing every cell of our body. if we're not careful, we could really hurt ourselves. Now, Dr. Jockers, we're hearing a lot about microbiome. That word's been put out there. There's even been events dedicated on this. How does the microbiome play a role in the development of neurodegenerative diseases?
Yeah, this is a huge topic. And so the 90s was considered by scientists the decade of the brain, meaning that we found so much new insights into how the brain functions, how it works. They were able to identify so much because they had all different types of testing that allowed them to do that. Well, I would say the 21st century is really the decade, so far, I guess you could say, the first 16 years really been all about the microbiome because of the human microbiome study that's going on, where they're actually genetically mapping all the microbes in our gut. And they actually have found that there's actually 100 times more genetic material in the microbes, meaning the viruses, the bacteria, the yeast, the parasites in our gut than there are in the cells of our body. And so it plays such a huge influence on our body's genetic expression, and they call the gut the second brain. And so that's the new term for the gut. It's the second brain. Why is that? Because the gut produces neurotransmitters, has a huge influence on all the neurotransmitters that are on a consistent basis kind of playing the orchestra that creates our brain function and our ability to learn information and to function and to experience life. And so we know that there's a tremendous amount of research showing that good bacteria like certain lactobacillus strains and bifidobacterium, which lactobacillus is typically in higher proportion in the small intestine and bifidobacterium is typically in higher proportion in the large intestine. These bacteria are actually, they're linked with increased brain excitability and neurological inflammation. And so what that means is that there's a couple different neurotransmitters. One neurotransmitter is glutamate. And in the brain, in many of the tissues of the brain, glutamate is excitatory. So it brings it closer to threshold and helps create some sort of activity. And then you have an inhibitory neurotransmitter called GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. And GABA is very relaxing on the brain, right? It's inhibitory, it helps relax. So if we have an imbalance there, too much glutamate is going to cause excitation, like headaches, irritability, anxiety, issues like that, where basically it's like almost like we feel like we're out of control and the brain's just firing, and it can cause excitotoxicity, neuroexcitotoxicity in the brain and damage different regions. Obviously, we don't want too much glutamate, and GABA is supposed to balance it out, and we naturally should be able to turn glutamate into GABA. So it's actually, there's enzymes that help break down glutamate and turn it into GABA, and GABA, again, that helps to just soothe and relax us. And low levels of GABA, because lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, these good bacteria, help to break down glutamate and form GABA. So low levels of GABA, they're associated with increased anxiety, seizures, depression, dementia, and Alzheimer's. So we have this increased excitability that's damaging nerve tissues. If there's a younger listener, the way that you'll know that you have decreased GABA would be that you may experience brain fog, increased irritation, like things just kind of bother you that really shouldn't bother you. Like, I'm having problems with my anger, anxiety. That's really common. Obsessive worrying, obsessive compulsive disorders. These are all signs that you don't have adequate GABA to balance out the glutamate. And so it could be coming from your gut. On top of that, gut microbes produce endotoxins. So they're toxins that are produced within the body. These endotoxins like lipopolysaccharides as well as amyloid. And I know that some of the speakers have talked about amyloid plaques, which are part of the pathophysiological process of Alzheimer's disease. What we found out, which most scientists did not know before, was that gut bacteria, actually produce amyloid. It's part of their biofilm that protects them from the immune system. And particularly bad bacteria, like gram-negative bacteria, such as E. coli and Salmonella and Shigella and Helicobacter, like Helicobacter pylori, different bacteria like that, they produce these amyloid proteins. And so basically, when they're producing an excessive amount of amyloid proteins, and we have a leaky gut, meaning that the gut membrane is damaged, and these amyloid proteins will start to seep into the bloodstream. And if we combine that with a blood sugar imbalance, now those amyloid proteins, which should never cross the blood-brain barrier, are going to cross that blood-brain barrier, and they could start accumulating in the hippocampus, which could obviously, be a part of the process of developing Alzheimer's. So a lot of indications that show that taking care of the gut is one of the best things you could possibly do for the health of your brain.
So, Dr. Jockers, what sort of a nutrition plan do you use to help somebody improve their brain and prevent or even reverse neurodegeneration like we're talking about here?
Absolutely. The diet that I like to use is a ketogenic diet where instead of utilizing sugar as our primary fuel source, we switch over to something called ketones. And ketones are produced by the liver. The liver breaks down fatty acids, and it produces these ketones. Particularly the one that's used by the brain is called beta-hydroxybutyrate. And what's been shown is that beta-hydroxybutyrate, we used to think that glucose, the brain had to have a source of sugar called glucose in our bloodstream. But we know today is that that's not actually true. It can run very well off beta-hydroxybutyrate. And beta-hydroxybutyrate helps strengthen neurons, helps improve the mitochondrial density. And mitochondria are the little engines within every cell that produce energy. And the brain is one of the organs that has, the brain and the heart are the most mitochondrial dense organs. So it helps improve the amount of mitochondria. It's called mitochondrial biogenesis, the biological production of these mitochondria. The more mitochondria we have in a cell, the stronger that cell is, the healthier it is. And so it actually helps improve the strength of those brain cells and improves their longevity and their resistance to oxidative stress, which is basically inflammation and free radical damage. And so this is really key. If we can provide that alternative fuel source, we're going to have a significantly healthier brain than if we're only depending on glucose. And so that is a huge finding. So we like to do a ketogenic diet that also focuses on really getting a lot of phytonutrients, and we'll talk in a second about that, and then also helps support the gut, just like we talked about. We've got to have a good, healthy gut. So ketogenic diet, the major nutrition source of calories is good fats. So by good fats, I mean things like coconut oil, butter from grass-fed cows. So when cows eat grass is very rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and so they start to bioaccumulate omega-3s, and those omega-3s become part of their meat as well as part of their milk. And so the butter is actually the best part. So the dairy fat is the least immune reactive. What I mean by that is a lot of people have sensitivities, especially people with leaky gut. They'll have sensitivities to the proteins and possibly the sugar in dairy, the lactose, which is the sugar, and casein and whey, which are the proteins. And so the fat, though, is where the gold is when it comes to dairy. So with butter, it's like concentrated fat, and it's got tons of fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin A, fat-soluble vitamin A, which is super key for the brain. Vitamin D, it's one of the best food sources of vitamin D, which is, again, really critical for the brain. Also, on top of that, it's got things like choline, which helps produce acetylcholine, which is a key neurotransmitter in the brain, particularly in the hippocampus, really necessary for memory formation. So choline, you get tons of that in the grass-fed butter. So I can go on and on about butter, but that's a phenomenally good fat. So coconut oil, coconut products, grass-fed butter, avocados are another amazing good fat source. Olive oil is great. Olives, those are all fantastic fat sources. What we want to avoid would be corn oil, like any sort of processed vegetable oil, like corn oil, soybean, cottonseed oil, peanut oil. These are all real high in omega-6 fats. Of course, any sort of partially hydrogenated or hydrogenated fat, trans fats, one of the worst things, massively damages the brain. So we definitely want to stay away from those. So good fats should be our primary point in our diet. We want to build all of our meals. If we're going to consider something a meal, like I don't consider a green juice, like if I was just doing a green juice, that wouldn't really be a meal. That would be more of a juice or a drink. Whereas if I'm having a meal, it's got to have at least one of those good fats. It's going to be the primary calorie source in that meal. And then we want to make sure we get a lot of phytonutrients. So lots of vegetables and herbs. So I'm a big fan of non-starchy vegetables, so dark green leafies, things like cucumbers and celery, different things like that. and getting a lot of dark green leafies into our system, tons of phytonutrients in there. Sprouts, I'm a big fan of sprouts, like broccoli sprouts, one of the best things for boosting up something called glutathione in our body, real powerful. And then herbs. And herbs are something that is really just not talked about enough when it comes to our nutrition plan. Definitely in a Western society, we have like no knowledge of herbs in a typical standard American diet. We're really not even using herbs. And so herbs are one of the best ways to get antioxidants into our system, using things like oregano, basil, thyme, ginger, rosemary, turmeric. I mean, these are powerful herbs that have incredible protective effects against oxidative stress, and they're also, many of them are antimicrobial. They destroy bad bacteria, viruses, improve our immune system, and just really great things to get into our diet on a regular basis. So putting that on food, fantastic strategy. And then we want clean protein, right? So it's like we're going up a pyramid. At the bottom, we got the good fats. Right above that, we got phytonutrients, getting that from vegetables, herbs, and I also should say low glycemic, low sugar fruit. I'm not a big fan of a lot of fruit, but some fruit is highly superior than other fruit. Like lemons and limes are probably one of the best. If you can handle citrus fruits, you want to be using that all over the place, because citrus fruits are so rich in bioflavonoids and vitamin C. And bioflavonoids help open up the capillaries. So they do something, they improve capillary permeability. Now, what I mean by that is it doesn't affect the blood-brain barrier, but what it does is it helps deep within our brain, all the blood vessels that are going in there trying to get oxygen in. It helps to kind of open them up. So again, the scarring, like we talked about when we have high blood sugar, the scarring of the arteries, it helps to reverse that. It helps get more oxygen and more nutrients into the brain. And so very powerful. We want to get a lot of bioflavonoids. The best food source of that would be like lemons and limes. You can juice them, particularly the peel. Peel is loaded with limonene, which is bioflavonoid, and then also juicing them. And the white part, too, is also very rich in rutin, which is a real powerful bioflavonoid. So squeezing lemon in your water is a great way. You can also use lemon essential oil, which is good, especially if you don't want to get your hands all citrusy and acidic and things like that. Sometimes it's going to be a little easier to just put the essential oil in. But that's a fantastic strategy. Berries are great. So blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, cherries are very good. They're very low in fructose, and we definitely want to have a low fructose, which is a form of sugar that's common in fruit, low sugar diet or low fructose diet. So berries are fantastic. We talked about clean protein, so that's going to be things like grass-fed beef, pasture-raised eggs, organic chicken and turkey, wild game like bison and antelope and things like that. This is what we want. Like my wife and I are going on a date tonight, and we are going to a restaurant that serves bison. So, I don't really purchase bison all that often, but whenever I go out, I research restaurants that serve things like bison, and I'm all over it. If they have things like sometimes you'll go to restaurants and they have deer meat. Deer meat's fantastic. Wild game is awesome. Organ meats can be great. Liver, things like that. Tons and tons of coenzyme Q10, which is super key for a healthy brain in liver. So doing organ meats can be great. Great source of protein and nutrients. And then right above that, as we're going up the pyramid, we've got fiber. So nuts and seeds. So I'm a fan of getting nuts and seeds in, but in moderation. I see a lot of people consume massive quantities of nuts and seeds, and they have phytates, right, and lectins and phytic acids. And so whenever you have nuts and seeds, especially if you're going to have a lot, like if you have a small amount of nuts and seeds, kind of like me, I don't do a lot of nuts and seeds, but I do a small amount, you really don't need to necessarily soak them to get the lectins off, because you're just not having a ton. Like I might have, on average, like a fourth a cup a day of nuts, and it may just be like 2 days a week, right, where I have something with almond flour or something like that, or just a big handful of nuts, or pumpkin seeds, which are my favorite seed. I like pumpkin seeds or hemp seeds. High amounts of nuts, though, you would want to soak and sprout them, right? So like you can purchase sprouted pumpkin seeds, and that's a lot better, because now we've gotten rid of the anti-nutrients there, and that's going to support our body even better. So nuts are a great source of good fiber. They also have a lot of nutrients in them that are healthy for the body. So if you can handle and tolerate nuts, fantastic food. And then right above that, fermented foods. So coconut water kefir, things like kimchi and sauerkraut. I'm a huge fan of getting those fermented vegetables into our diet, as well as getting the fermented drinks. Like I drink, I don't know, Jonathan, if you're familiar with Kavita. Have you ever heard of Kavita?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's a coconut water kefir. It's real common, and it's really growing in popularity here in the United States, and I see it all over the place now. And so it's a really tasty coconut water kefir. So they take coconut water and they ferment it. We know coconut water has got basically the perfect mineral balance for our bloodstream. So it's a phenomenal electrolyte replacement. It's like the perfect energy drink, but it's higher in sugar. And obviously we want to have a lower sugar diet. So when they ferment it, the bacteria, the microorganisms, break down the sugar and they produce B vitamins, organic acids, which actually organic acids are super key for providing a healthy environment for good gut microbes. And then it also has enzymes and probiotics in there. So I drink that. I'd probably drink one of those every day. It's so good. I also love just straight fermented ginger. It's like pickled ginger. So good for the body. I mean, ginger has incredible health benefits. In Asian cultures, where they have lower rates of things like Alzheimer's disease, it's part of their traditional cuisine. They have fermented ginger. They have basically pickled ginger with almost every meal. And so that's a healthy culture right there. Ginger, again, so powerful as an anti-inflammatory, so good for the digestive system. So try to get those fermented foods and drinks into our system on a regular basis. And right at the very top is natural sweeteners. And so stevia is my favorite because it's 100 times sweeter than sugar. It's natural. I can grow it in my backyard out here, and I do. It's awesome. And so I also purchase it in a liquid. I like a liquid dropper with it. 100 times sweeter than sugar, no effect on our blood sugar. And research has shown it has anti-inflammatory benefits as well. So I love stevia. Another good one is monk fruit or lohan extract, which is becoming more and more popular. Some people have a sensitivity. I mean, just like anything, some people have a sensitivity to stevia, so they have a little bit more inflammation. With those people, I try to steer them towards monk fruit, lohan extract, or possibly xylitol. I'm not a huge fan of sugar alcohols. For me, sugar alcohols, they cause bloating. I just don't feel good with them, and that's because the unique bacterial balance in my gut just doesn't digest them very well. Whereas other people have told me they feel great with them and they don't have any gas or bloating. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis. But the good thing about sugar alcohols is they do not affect your blood sugars. They help keep your blood sugar real stable. You just got to see how your body's processing and digesting those. But those are my favorite natural sweeteners. Just below that, you would have things like raw honey, which has a lot of health benefits, but it also will raise your blood sugar. Grade B maple syrup, which again has a lot of B vitamins. Just a non-processed maple syrup, however, again, will raise your blood sugar. Same thing with coconut sugar. So those would be better. Oh, and one other one that's a little harder to come by, but is yakan syrup, which actually is low glycemic. It's kind of in that same category as monk fruit. It would actually be really good. And so that's another good one that you can use, especially if you don't tolerate stevia very well. So that's really our food guide pyramid. We try to stick with those good fats, get tons and tons of vegetables, some healthy proteins. We may also use a protein powder like a pea protein, or if you handle dairy, non-denatured whey protein or collagen protein to support the joints and the skin. So getting good protein powders in there can be great. But those good fats and the healthy protein and those phytonutrients, that will help to stabilize your blood sugar, support your gut, help you reduce inflammation, and help strengthen the development of new neurons.
Dr. Jockers, just this one go-around, I have taken so many notes, but this is something that I could listen to over and over again and get a little bit more information from. Great outline. Just a word, if you don't mind, before we get to nutritional supplements, as we're finishing out the program. I think we should speak to those people who don't want to have the bison or the animal foods. I just want to be really clear about healthy fats and proteins. People are hearing about salmon and coconut oil, and they get all of that, but I don't want people to feel like if for philosophical reasons they don't want to have animal food, they can still do this cleaner way of eating that nourishes the brain and keeps away from the threats that are bombarding the brain these days with poor food choices. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely can. And so, one benefit of being, in a sense, like a vegetarian or a vegan is probably the greatest source of environmental chemicals getting into the human body is commercialized animal products, right? And so oftentimes carnivores, we oftentimes will eat meat that's not healthy for us. Most people in society are doing that. They're taking in rampant amounts of chemical toxins. So there is some benefit at times to being a vegetarian or a vegan. And so with that, again, I'm a huge fan of good fats. So if you're doing non-animal sources, avocados. I mean, I try to get an avocado every single day. It's one of the best sources of magnesium, potassium, which helps with blood flow into the brain. Again, we talk about magnesium protecting that blood-brain barrier. Avocados are amazing. Olives and olive oil. I love olives. I'm a huge fan of black olives. Olive oil is so amazing. Just a lot of antioxidants in there. So we want to do things like that. Coconut oil, coconut butter, coconut flakes. Awesome stuff. I mean, you can do things like my wife makes coconut flour donut holes that taste absolutely amazing. She'll put all different herbs like cinnamon and turmeric sometimes in them. She'll put a pea protein or a hemp protein in there, which are both good proteins. And so it's almost like it's made with coconut butter, which is a really good fat to support the brain. Medium chain fat that helps produce ketones quickly, supports the brain, and this helps stabilize your blood sugar. It's really, really good for blood sugar, and it tastes great. The flavoring is stevia. It's awesome. So we can do things like that. We've got a recipe for a turmeric coconut cup. So it's like coconut butter and turmeric on the top, flavored with stevia. So another great way to get more turmeric, which is one of the best antioxidants, one of the best things for protecting the brain, so powerful for the body, into the system. I mean, there's so many things you can do. If you are a vegan vegetarian, I would highly recommend making sure that when you're doing a lot of nuts and seeds, sprouting those, soaking them and sprouting them, though, so you can get rid of those lectins, and then that'll be a lot safer. You can consume a lot more. I mean, do a lot of sprouts. You can sprout lentils, you can sprout all different types of things. So, when you're doing that, that's going to really help with nutrient absorption and help just reduce inflammation in the body.
Oh, yeah. And you're also going to be increasing the nutrient intake as well. The broccoli sprouts, pea sprouts, all of those things. Dr. Jockers, this is great advice. Let's talk now about nutritional supplements that you see are really designed to improve brain function.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple big ones. Well, omega-3s are huge. So the brain is really fat, and omega-3s help create fluidity around the cell membrane, which allow basically the cell to kind of shape itself in an appropriate manner so it can have good neurotransmitter function. It also helps with neurogenesis, this kind of process of forming new nerve cells. And so omega-3s like DHA and EPA, so like a fish oil base, or if you're a vegetarian, you'd want to do one with algae. It's better than flax oil because algae is a natural form of DHA. That's where the fish get it from, is eating algae. So you'd want to do one with algae. I know there's a couple brands out that have that added algae with DHA, and that's really key, especially for pregnant women. You want to do a lot of omega-3s because the child's brain is developing, and you want to make sure you have that in there. So that's super key. Also, there's a lot of things that help boost glutathione. And glutathione is our body's master antioxidant, really helps protect the brain tissue from things like heavy metals like aluminum and mercury, helps coordinate the immune system to reduce inflammation in the body. So there's a lot of compounds out there like N-acetylcysteine or alpha-lipoic acid that help to boost up glutathione. And they also things like turmeric, like if you take a turmeric supplement, which should be like a curcumin, you'll see curcumin, that's going to help boost glutathione. So it's always good to do things that help boost glutathione. Vitamin D. I mean, can't say enough about vitamin D, but there's huge amount of research showing links between low vitamin D levels and increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. So making sure you get your vitamin D levels up. And by up, I mean like really up. Like this is our optimal level, should be between 60 and 100 nanograms per milliliter. A lot of my patients come in and they're like, and I say, hey, did you get your vitamin D level checked? And they said, yes, the doctor said my vitamin D level was good. But what by good, they meant 38 nanograms per milliliter. That's not good. Your risk of developing cancer, Alzheimer's disease is significantly high at 38 nanograms per milliliter when a very inexpensive supplement or going out and doing a lot of sunbathing, healthy sunbathing, can get you up into that 60 to 100 nanogram per milliliter range and significantly reduce your risk of both cancer and of Alzheimer's disease and autoimmunity. So definitely getting that vitamin D level optimized. Probiotics, so good bacteria for the gut and supporting the gut is super critical, just like we talked about before. And we can go on, but those are some basics to really get started with.
Dr. Jockers, I'm the first one to admit how biased I am with vitamin C. I'm sure you like vitamin C.
Yeah, vitamin C is huge, right? So vitamin C is just super critical for, it's just kind of the basic reducing oxidative stress and plays such a big role in just keeping oxidative stress down and under control. So yeah, I'm a big fan of vitamin C, either in a liposomal form, or if you do vitamin C with a combination of bioflavonoids, that's also shown to be very, very good, very effective. And if you do have Alzheimer's disease, one thing you may want to consider would be like an IV vitamin C to really flush the system and really downregulate inflammation so your body can heal. Because when you have chronic inflammation, you can't heal and regenerate. And when you're so far gone to where you are showing signs of dementia or Alzheimer's, it's kind of like an avalanche. Like an avalanche starts as a small little snowball, right? Small little rumbling of snow. And if you catch it when it's a small little rumbling, no big deal, right? It's easy to stop and no harm done. But when it starts building up momentum and growing and growing and growing, gosh, you need a massive force in order to stop that. So if you're showing those signs or if you have full-blown Alzheimer's, you need a massive force. And sometimes that includes things like hyperbaric oxygen. That can include, very strict ketogenic diet, IV vitamin C, some different therapies, some different advanced therapies like that to really stop that momentum and to reduce that inflammation and to turn your body back into, in a sense, a level of balance to where it can start to heal and regenerate and develop new neurons.
Dr. Jockers, fantastic information. Let's finish up the program just by having you describe what exactly neurogenesis is and what are some of the unique ways to stimulate this.
Yeah, neurogenesis is really one of the most exciting things. If we really understand, I really hope my listeners get this. Neurogenesis is one of the most exciting physiological processes that goes on in our body. And what it is, it's actually, genesis is the formation of new neurons. And so the brain can actually rewire itself and we can grow these new neurons and strengthen different patterns in our brain that are going to give us a survival advantage and allow us to thrive in life. And so basically, you think about a nerve and it comes out, it kind of looks like a tree. So let's look at a tree with a lot of branches. Okay, that's kind of a healthier nerve. Basically, neurogenesis, the more that we fire a brain cell, so when we're thinking in a certain way, when we're moving in a certain way, we're firing certain brain cells, they start to form. The more it gets fired, the more it starts to grow, and it's something called dendritic sprouting, where it grows these branches. In the brain, they're called dendrites. It's basically a tree branch. And one neuron can actually have up to 30,000 dendrites, 30,000 branches. And those branches go out to other neurons and create this interconnected activity. They stimulate or they inhibit other neurons depending on what they're supposed to do. And we can stimulate these neurons through certain life experiences, moving our body, for example, movement. We'll talk about this in more detail, but movement is one of the greatest ways to stimulate neurogenesis, the formation of these nerve cells. We can also do it through mental imagery. Just visualizing things can actually stimulate neurogenesis. It's amazing how athletes do this on a regular basis. Like Michael Jordan, he was asked how repeatedly he could consistently make big shots in the stressful moments of the game, right? Clutch time, he consistently make big shots. And a reporter asked him, how do you consistently do that? And he said, if you could understand, or if you can understand how many times I've seen myself making those shots in my head, then you'd understand how I can consistently make them, right? So some sort of a quote like that. And what he meant by that was he visualized over and over and over again. He would take an hour before the game, have music on that would help stimulate his brain, and he would just visualize himself going through the game. Mental imagery, mental visualization is one of the best ways to grow these new nerve cells. And when we think thoughts of abundance, when we think thoughts of victory and overcoming the odds and gratitude, we stimulate really great neuronal cells, right? Basically, this really positive branching that goes on in our nerve cells, as opposed to when we think more constricting thoughts of fear and scarcity and worry and just all those types of negative limiting beliefs. We actually contract, the nerve cells contract, and we start to support neural networks that aren't going to favor us. So mental imagery is huge. And then we could do, obviously, eating good foods helps stimulate neurogenesis. Also, the ketogenic diet, so beta-hydroxybutyrate, helps stimulate neurogenesis. Very, very important. Good bacteria help it. And then from a functional perspective, just things we can do on a regular basis, exercise. Regular exercise, so key for producing something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic growth factor. That's the key factor in producing new nerve cells and new branches from the nerve cells. So Einstein, they actually studied his brain at Stanford, and they thought, oh, does he have new neurons? They were wondering if he had more neurons than the average individual. And what they actually found was that he had the same amount of neurons, but he had twice as much synapses, which are little gaps between the neurons. And one of the things Einstein used to do, he used to pace back and forth as he was thinking. He'd use a lot of mental imagery, and he would pace back and forth down his hallway while he was doing that. So he was thinking. He also juggled. He was a good juggler. And basically pacing back and forth, like a heel-to-toe walk or something like that, or juggling. These are called neurobic activities. And neurobics is actually, it's an amazing thing. It's basically when we're doing novel movements, like new types of movements and new types of activities, and it stimulates regions of the brain and helps our brain produce a lot of BDNF, this brain-derived neurotropic growth factor. So there's a lot of things you can do for neurobics. You can try to focus on one sense. Like Leonardo da Vinci there's a book called Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. And what Da Vinci, one of the things he did was he would take, I think it was something like a half hour every single day and just focus on one sense. So he would just look and he would try to pick up all the unique colors and patterns out in the world, out in nature. And he would just focus on visual sense. And then he would focus on auditory sense. And then he would try to listen to everything that was going on. And he would focus on his olfaction, which is smelling, right? So you try to smell and take in all the scents. And this was stimulating different unique regions of the brain. And of course, he was a Renaissance man. The guy was phenomenal painter, a writer, philosopher. And so he had basically an expanded amount of talents compared to a normal individual. And one of the reasons why was because he was practicing neurobics, stimulating these unique regions of the brain, creating massive increases in BDNF, these new branching patterns in his brain that allowed him to have incredible human performance. And so it's amazing what we can do through understanding neurobics and understanding the overall concept of neurogenesis and being able to utilize that to our advantage.
Dr. Jockers, all I can simply say is wow. I want to thank you so much for your time, and I want to thank our listeners for joining us today. If you would like a copy of this program, plus all the other presentations inside the Alzheimer's and Dementia Summit, simply click the banner you see on this page. Thanks again for attending the Alzheimer's and Dementia Summit. Talk to you soon. Take care.